welcome to Improving and Diversifying the STEM Student Experience, What's Next, a Times Higher Education webinar in partnership with Digital Ed. My name's Julia Gilmore. I'm the Branded Content Manager at THE, and I'll be chairing today's discussion. Please note that a recording of today's discussion will be available on demand along with a summary article on the Times Higher Education website, should you wish to revisit this webinar or share it on social media or with colleagues. I'm delighted to be joined today by a panel of experts from academia and industry who are Robert Allen, Director of Teaching and Learning, School of Applied Sciences at the University of Huddersfield, Louise Krimpatic, Vice President, Enterprise Services at Digital Ed, and Mark Schofield, Dean of Learning and Teaching, Edge Hill University. Those of you in the audience today will be able to put questions to the panel using the Q&A box provided. We will try to answer as many of these as possible during the session. Please also feel free to share your own experiences and comments using the chat box function. With course curricula and delivery forever altered by the move to hybrid teaching and learning, STEM education now faces a series of new challenges to engage a different type of student cohort for whom increased access and personalised learning are critically important. Today, our panel will exchange knowledge and discuss best practice about what strategies universities should adopt in response to these challenges. And I'd like to begin by asking, how can asynchronous learning help undergraduate STEM students acquire the knowledge and skills they need for higher education? And Robert, you're at the top of my screen, so I'm going to go to you first.
Well, thank you very much. I think it permits engagement by the students in their own time and at their own pace. And that sits well in many respects with kind of inclusivity and accessibility. There are issues, obviously, with having appropriate infrastructure in place. For example, sufficient access to broadband and laptops. My own institution had some issues with students not having appropriate laptops during the initial lockdown. And I'm sure other colleagues out in the sector suffered the same issues.
Yeah. Mark, is that something you experienced?
Well, to a degree, but it was something we were able to predict in our facilities to be able to deal with that. I think just reflect on the question about asynchronous learning. I suppose it's a case of what people's understanding of that is. And I think there's ways of interpreting asynchronous learning which is significantly different. One is where a lot of stuff is just dumped online, where students go and navigate the unnavigable. Or there are materials, interactive media, etc., that are placed there in very purposeful ways, in purposeful sequences, such as time release for students to engage with over a time course in slow release, so that they can engage, as Robert said, by choice, with some personalization, matching into the tempo of their study, but also perhaps the rest of the life that they're leading, often with work as well. So I think it does give opportunities for personalization and choice. I think asynchronous must also be considered in relation to the opportunities for people to be able to talk to each other, maybe not immediately, but post something, get a response. The worst asynchronous work I've experienced here and in other countries is where there's no moderation, there's no tutor presence. The evidence suggests that if there's no presence, then the students' engagement drops right off. Indeed, they just don't attend in cyberspace at all. So I think it's got a place to play, to consolidate, to bridge between the face-to-face teaching sessions or labs or whatever. But the key thing is design, purposeful design. Otherwise, the students will not engage without a reason to engage.
Yeah, I would agree with that, Mark. And I also think too, the asynchronous nature of learning, there are some other benefits. And again, it's very purposeful. Some schools have, throughout the pandemic, there's the worry, what level are the students now at? What have they managed to take from their learning during the pandemic? And so a lot of schools have gone to things like, here's a readiness course. So you've been accepted into a particular course. Here's a course that you can take ahead of time that shows you what you're expected to know going in, and gives the students that opportunity to prepare before they get into their actual course.
I agree. There's lots of opportunity to look at creatively at induction, at transitions, formative development for assessment, rehearsal type of work, simulation work, which people can actually go and hone their skills and apply and integrate their knowledge in problem spaces that are there, like, simulation, laboratories, etc., etc. So the great creative opportunity, but the word design always comes back to me.
Yeah, and I would also, sorry, Julia.
No, I was going to go to you anyway, so that's fine.
I was also just going to add to the other thing that asynchronous learning allows you to do as an instructor is there are certain elements of your course that students may have forgotten the material that they're going to need, or maybe they just need a little refresher. And in an asynchronous setting, you can make those learning resources available to them. But again, as Mark said, design is super important because you don't want to just put lots of stuff up there that the student has to try to navigate and figure out what they need. But if you are very specific about what they need, then if they feel they need that refresher, they can go and learn that material or just read through it quickly to refresh their mind on it.
Definitely. And what would you say, what interpersonal feedback loops should be formed between students and teachers to enable continuous improvement related to both asynchronous and synchronous learning?
Well, that's a big question, to be honest. One of the issues, I think, is staff need to have appropriate data or real-time data on the students' performance or engagement with a wide variety of different materials whether it be the VLE or in class or whatever. And at present, not all the systems are talking to each other. And that can create a challenge where, for example, a course leader may have to dip into 3, 4, or 5 different systems to get current information on a particular student's performance. And so you can't then have the appropriate intervention that you would perhaps like to have. So it does need to, greater integration of all the various systems is important. And many institutions have legacy systems that are either unsupported or they've only got partial support. And if you're starting from fresh, you can have a much better integration.
Fantastic. And Louise, how does digital ed facilitate this sort of integration?
Well, so, I mean, I guess I have a couple of points here. In terms of integration, I think Robert's, absolutely correct, right? If you have material in so many different systems and trying to then understand how that all relates and trying to find the information in different places gets very difficult. So the technology, I think it's very important for the technology to work together. Mobius, our platform, can integrate into the VLE so that the students are in their VLE, they then take an assignment or a lesson within Mobius, and any of those grades are immediately pushed back into the VLE so that the instructor can have that one course shell that they're really looking at for their information. The other thing that I would mention in terms of interpersonal feedback loop is getting that immediate feedback to the student. My son is in university right now, and sometimes he will go 3 weeks, a month, and in some courses he didn't actually get his assignment back before the final exam. Well, if he had any misconceptions that he had on those assignments, he has had no time to review them, to correct them, so that he has learned what he needs to learn. And so getting that immediate feedback to students is super important so that they have a chance to ask questions when they're still learning so that they can cement the right pieces of information. And not only that, from the instructor's point of view, getting those grades immediately allows them to look at the material and see, okay, are there certain questions that the entire class didn't do well on, and what, then they can look at those questions to determine, okay, was there an issue with the question, with the way it was asked, was it confusing, so that they can be corrected going forward.
Fantastic. Mark, I'd love to hear your opinion on this as well.
Yeah, it makes me think a lot. I mean, I like the notion of interpersonal feedback loops. It makes me think about a lot of things, whether it be online or face-to-face. teaching in STEM as partly having a didactic function. There's got to be knowledge and things that people learn and see, and skill acquisition. There's this business of ongoing dialogue as a function of the asynchronous online environment, or synchronous online teaching, and in laboratories and in practical sessions, etc. That constant dialogue. I think the idea that the feedback loops must involve formative developmental feedback prior to assessment, so that the whole idea of formative developmental work is built into the teaching stuff. So there's practice, there's rehearsal, there's honing of skills prior to the final kind of judgments about competency or skills, knowledge, application, integration. So I think those things are important. I think immediacy is really quite important. When students do anything which is about assessment or performance, and then there is a void where no feedback exists. I mean, one, that is bad design. But two, I think it's inviting, particularly in cyberspace, the focus on development of things like chatbots, the little chatbots like we have in our banking, where somebody says, do you want to chat about this? Or if they're really intelligent, where the students are stuck with a problem, they're programmed so that they can actually say, well, you're stuck on this bit, here's some ways to think about it. So this idea of the emergence of intelligent agents, chatbots, etc., is already on the scene, but I think they're becoming more and more intelligent over time. We'll see more and more of them to actually not replace teachers. I don't think that's going to happen ever, but I do think we will find these things helping students to navigate the feedback loops. And there's the other bits in feedback loops, interpersonal feedback loops, which are about just students having a voice about their experience, what works for them, what doesn't work for them, call it quality management and enhancement, whatever. But I think that's all part of, as well, the STEM teachers modeling the way in which they behave as STEM practitioners, the culture and identity that they develop over time.
Yeah, definitely. And something else that digital learning definitely facilitates is kind of making communities of students. So why do you think creating learning communities is important to maximize STEM students' retention and attainment?
You want me to start? Or I think there's the opportunity for peer-to-peer instruction and communities of learning, people working at a similar pace. For example, we've got an awful lot of commuter students, and they tend to use a particular area of our facility at a particular time when they're doing their work. And there's a group of them that they become friends and they work together on a variety of different things, not colluding or anything else like that, but testing their knowledge and understanding of stuff. So I think it can be quite useful for that. So I see digital learning as a great support to developing our students' competencies and ultimately their performance progression through the course and into the world of work.
Definitely. And do you think this also helps with kind of raising awareness and representation of diversity in STEM subjects? Because there's been a lot that's been said about the lack of diversity in STEM. And I wonder if kind of digital learning and learning communities can help improve this diversity issue.
See, it's interesting. My own particular provision in my school, we've got we recruit heavily from our local community, which is I'm very proud of that. We have some courses that we only have possibly 5% white ethnicity on it. The rest are from the local ethnic community. They have a huge appetite for higher education, and they're embracing it because in many respects it's transformative for them. So I see the kind of digital side of things as being almost anonymous, because you don't have to put your camera on. You can use any form of, and you could become an avatar if you so wished, if you know, I mean, there's an anonymity there, or you can open yourself up to the community. So I think it can draw people in that possibly would not, say, ask questions in a face-to-face environment.
Mm-hmm. Mark, have you found?
I would add too that, in the digital environment, you have this ability to provide so many different contexts for your students. so that you can reach out to a broader range of students just with even your examples, so that they feel, you know, that they're being included. It's not just a, you know, a standard problem, but maybe it has a little bit of their context within the problem. And I think that is very important. And as well, for the students who may struggle, the online learning allows them to maybe catch up, right? They're not, if they do poorly on one assignment or one section, they're not then behind for the rest. They have that ability to, the material is there, they can work to catch up. And I've actually seen some instructors do some really interesting courseware design where they've had, you know, if a student, they have sort of tracks within their course, so that if a student does well all the way through, they might finish the course a little bit earlier. But then there's room so that if a student doesn't do well on a certain course, they can move into this other track, and it just takes them a little bit longer, but they get to the same place. So meeting the students where they are is super important to help them get to where they need to be at the end.
Mm-hmm.
I think the benefits of learning communities are well documented right the way through, from the development of kind of exchange for professional skills, etc. But I think where they are engineered in class, in labs, and complemented by online or replicated to degree online, I mean, the efficacy is pretty well evidenced in terms of a sense of belonging is one of the biggest indicators of stickability, with implications for retention, etc. And you know, STEM subjects are quite hard. They're hard work. There's a lot of contact time. There's a lot of study time. Expect a lot of independent time. And so as a consequence, being part of community practice where you can help each other out or feel that you're not alone. So there's the social interchanges as well as the kind of the study related interchanges all add up to that sense of belonging and that contribution to retention. I think also these communities of practice contribute to the kind of growing identity as somebody, you know, as a electrical engineer, a chemical engineer, or physiologist, whatever it is, in that they start to work with others with guidance and support from the tutor to start to behave like and think like somebody in a STEM discipline, who's then going to take those things out into post-graduation work or study, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, sorry, Julia, to go along with that, Mark, I think too, the ability of technology to provide randomized questions for students, where now students, they can't say, what did you get as the answer for question number 3? And I think this goes along with Robert's point as well, but they have to talk about, how did you get the answer for question number 3? So now they're actually communicating about their subject. And as students are working together in that way, talking about how to get to a solution, that also helps with retention and attainment, because you learn something better by explaining it to someone else.
Definitely. And even if I think, Robert, you touched on this earlier about the issue of how to get the right infrastructure for digital learning. How do you think universities can target this? Because like you said, not everyone does have access to super fast broadband. Some people may have other sort of commitments that prevent them from getting online at a certain time. How do you think digital learning can help with this?
Well, each institution has a certain level of funding, and they will allocate that as they see fit. But if you're thinking strategically, you've really got to be thinking in terms of digital in the future. There's going to be a move, I think, more towards hybrid learning. Part of that is governed by cost. The infrastructure is a very, very costly investment, and you've got to get things right. I've had experience of certain platforms that have not provided the outcome that we would like to have, and that's down to us initially not really understanding what the true problem was and what the platform could do for us. But I think the infrastructure stuff, from it comes all the way down to, have students got the appropriate mechanism to access their learning. We have an awful lot of students who come from IMD 1 and IMD 2. They do not necessarily have a private study space. And that can have quite a profound impact on the student's ability to engage with their learning. And I can see the time coming when there will be a study package that the student will get when they enroll at an institution, and there will be a specific laptop will be provided of some description. I can see some institutions going down that line because it allows them to have reliable digital learning.
Mm-hmm.
For me, absolutely right, Robert. I think that's, again, the design word is a frequent word in that the unique situated context of the students that are going to enroll on programs, that's what we design for. So if there's going to be a significant digital component and expectations, it's naive to include those in design if students have digital poverty or there's bandwidth issues, etc. I mean, that is really, the devil is in the detail of the design on that front. I think the idea that we will move to more and more digital, yeah, I mean, I think most of us accept that as a given. But I think making sure that we have an alignment of purpose, audience, and form, so we don't run straight to the form of technology. We ask about the purpose for learning, the unique situated context of those audience, which includes their digital capabilities, not just their access to technology and bandwidth. And that all becomes part of the design and realization pathway. But if we're going to design a program for validation, in other words, for permission to deliver, then all of those considerations have to be taken. Otherwise, you can design something that people can't access.
I think that's a very pertinent point. It is about making sure that we scaffold the students and staff. Let's be honest, there's a staff learning, staff development issue here as well. And it's making sure we have all our ducks basically aligned in many respects. And I think we all have experience of episodes where things don't go according to plan. And we don't want to have failure, because once you have failure, it's always cast back at you that didn't work, so all your ideas must be poor. And that's something that needs to be avoided.
Definitely. Louise, do you have anything to add to that?
So I definitely agree, right? That the design and the infrastructure and the are super important. I think institutions are definitely realizing that there's going to be an online component, a digital component that is required, or that is prevalent now. And part of that, from the institution's point of view, is it allows them to offer up their courses to a wider range of audience. To students from anywhere, because now if they're able to study virtually, then they can broaden their reach. So I think it is important, as both Robert and Mark have said, for the institutions to make sure that they're aligned in what is the purpose, what are they trying to do, and how are they going to enable both the instructors and the students in using that model. I think that's super important. And one of the things that, again, we learned during the pandemic. Before the pandemic, there were some instructors or some institutions that said they weren't going to go online, or they never would go online, or they couldn't go online. And obviously through the pandemic, we realized that we could go online. You could teach those subjects online. And now it's a matter of looking at the landscape and saying, okay, so what are the best uses of these different modalities that we can offer to our students, and how do we then incorporate them together into a cohesive course offering?
Mm-hmm. Definitely. And how can staff and faculty be better supported to provide this kind of world-class digital learning experience? So obviously we're talking about students here, but you can't have students without the staff.
Yeah, I mean, I think everybody would agree that whatever we do, we've got a duty to make it high quality. And as a consequence, it does have implications for the digital capabilities, design capabilities, and the professional development status of staff, coupled with the development of digital capabilities, not just in using technologies, but actually being able to navigate them and work within them and learn within them and understand the fragilities of going in and out of technologies and social media and digital footprint and all those type of things. I think for me, again, one has to make sure that whatever digital elements are there, they are really, really well designed and factored in. You know, we mustn't just fetishize these technologies, but one of the paradoxes of the pandemic has been productivity. People have upskilled very, very quickly. They have become more critical of the technologies that are available. I think what we'll see as an indication of an increased kind of consumer digital awareness from the university's point of view is that they're going to be more expecting and more exacting about the products, the types of virtual learning environments, etc., that we're seeing. And I think we'll see a lot of refinements to the types of products that we typically invest in.
Okay.
I would endorse that. We have various training programs, CPD for staff, as every institution will have. And frankly, I was very impressed in how the sector pivoted to online learning during COVID. I think as a sector, we did exceptionally well in a relatively short period of time. We constructed an online training course for all our staff, and everyone completed it. And the quality, some of the quality of the materials that have been produced are excellent. They're still being used today. So the investment of time 2 or 3 years ago has created resources that are still usable today. Now, they may package it up in slightly different ways, but there's an efficiency there. And if you compare the learning of students, say 3 years, 4 years ago with now, you can have a comparison to see the potential impact of some of these teaching initiatives. It's not a straight one's better than the other, but it does give the students a much richer environment in which to learn compared to, shall we say, some face-to-face experiences.
Right. Louise, do you have anything to add to what Robert or Mark have said?
Yeah, in North America, it's interesting to have seen the evolution of teaching and technology and how instructors are incorporating technology. So if I look back maybe 15 years ago, 20 years ago, instructors were kind of on their own if they wanted to incorporate something else into their class. But over the last 10, 15 years, there has been this creation of this group called the Instructional Design Group, right? Or Extended Learning Group, or different, it has different names. But the idea behind it is that there's a group of people who understand the technology, who understand how to introduce that technology into the classroom and help with the design of a course and how that design should work. And they work with the instructors, both in terms of suggesting technology in some cases, or in creating some of their online material that can then be delivered to their students. And those groups are super important because those are the groups that tend to be, most informed about things like what are some of the accessibility standards that when you're moving things online, you have to consider and that you have to use within your online material. Or the diversity and inclusion, and what are some of the rules that need to be followed. And so those groups have become more and more prevalent, but also really important in making sure that the digital offerings that are being provided reach a certain standard.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And what would you say that the role of data analysis is to help students and staff perform better as related to technology? Sorry, Robert.
I think used effectively, it can be very powerful. For example, a student can benchmark themselves. They don't necessarily have to see how other students perform, but they can see what the average score was, or the median score, or maximum, minimum, etc. And so they can start to benchmark themselves. They can start to see how well they're progressing through the program. Are they going slightly faster or slower than others? That can be dangerous from the point of view that people could get anxiety that I'm only on stage 1, where my friends are on stage 5. So there needs to be subtle or nuanced discussion about that and the progression of students through that. But a tutor needs to interact with them. I think Mark mentioned earlier on about the chat rooms and stuff like that. It's not leaving the students to their own devices. It has to be managed. It has to be scaffolded in order to get the best out for the students.
I'd extend the notion of data to qualitative data alongside quantitative data. I mean, there's all kinds of opportunities to engage with analytics, as long as it's done ethically and it's not about giving students a type which labels them as they're the ones who are going to fail. And we're very cautious with that type of approach. But staff and students being able to see data about students' performance to support formative development work, things that are diagnostic and supportive, I think is really quite useful. And alongside the data that emerges around conversations with students about what works and what's effective. Also data and design. I mean, for some students, if we know about their unique characteristics, if they're never going to come to a university, but they're distributed, then that's going to lend itself by design to some online type of program. But data about those students and where they are and how they can travel to campuses or not, etc., are all part of the design questions. And it may be that you've got mixed economy where that lends itself to students in class and students at distance in hybrid environments, which tends to work best with postgraduate students, if I'm frank. But again, the data, qualitative, how people are experiencing things, and the quality management enhancement functions, hard data, which is around student performance and whether or not there's additional needs or interventions or whatever, but also data about the needs of students before we actually design the program for them. So data and market analysis in terms of making sure you design the best program for students to be included and succeed.
And I would add, not even just the data of how did students do on particular assignments, but with digital components, you can track so much information. We have so much data available on, when did students, interact with this material? How long did they spend? Did they go back to certain pieces multiple times? How many times did they try these practices? And that type of information is invaluable for an instructor to look at and sort of say, okay, there's, like most of the class went back to this particular question multiple times, or this example multiple times, and then from the instructor's point of view, it gives you that insight into your material that you can then look at your material to see, are there pieces that, you can adjust, you can modify to improve the experience.
Yeah, for promulgating things like personalization and individualized support, etc. If we can actually get the kind of data footprints to see how students are behaving online, it enables us to either say we've done a good job with the design and the intentions that we had, or we haven't and we need to redesign. So this iterative cycle of using data to actually get a sense of the quality of our design and improve it. Yeah.
Yeah, I've actually got a question, Mark, from our Q&A section that was asking you, do you have any good examples of how properly designed material for asynchronous learning should look like?
Yeah, I mean,
experience, of course.
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of things like that, but I think it's probably the easiest way to respond is to start from a question: what do I want my students to learn? And is asynchronous learning appropriate for that? And if it is, then what are we going to put in place? So what is it we want them to learn? And what type of asynchronous learning will support that? If we want students to perhaps consolidate learning, then it's about putting things online for them to read, watch, etc., with some activities associated with them. Otherwise, it's an empty experience. If we want students to be asynchronously problem solving, then that would be designing for something like asynchronous chat. If we want students to be working independently, studying something independently, then it might be about the design of what we release first, what we release second, what we release third, etc. So sequence, cohesion, etc. All design principles. It depends on really what you're trying to achieve. What do I want my students to learn is the fundamental question. And then ask, are synchronous and asynchronous solutions the right thing? Not just run into asynchronous and saying, well, I'll retrofit it. I mean, that isn't a great way of thinking about design.
Yeah, I agree, Mark. And I've had interesting conversations with instructors around the design of courses where, you know, I think some people, when they think about online, they just think about, oh, well, I'm just going to put everything that I do in person, I'm going to put it online, and then it's available to the student. But I think you really have to think about, what are your learning objectives? What do you want the student to learn? What do you want them to get out of the course? And what are the pieces of material that are critical to that? So that you can then, you start to develop your course knowing that what you're putting online is going to help the student achieve the goal. Rather than, you know, we talked about it at the very beginning, there being lots of information, and how does the student possibly navigate that, because they don't have the instructor's experience of, oh, that's just an information piece versus this is something critical that they need to digest and understand.
Stephen Heppel criticized a lot of early work with virtual learning environments as almost being like a dump, where you dump some stuff for students to go and find their way around it. And then you stick a discussion group in there because that will mean that they're going to interact without any design. What was the reason to interact? How were they supposed to engage with the materials? So again, it comes back to the design feature, whether that be synchronous, asynchronous. It's irrelevant, really. It's about what you want the students to learn.
I think a major component as well, that particularly in the kind of years when, in the COVID years, not that they're finished yet, but one of the main things that digital learning was facilitating was assessment. And I'd like to ask, what new and trusted modes of assessment are driving attainment in STEM subjects? What's the place of the old methods, so to speak, and where do the new methods kind of complement or even exceed these?
From my,
Robert,
from my perspective, we've got certain PSRBs that are very much focused on the exam experience or control conditions. For example, pharmacy have a professional exam at the end, and they have to be capable of passing that, otherwise they can't practice. So it's really course team's responsibility to get the students prepared to be able to pass that. I see, for example, Mobius gives the opportunity to have so many iterations of different questions that you can have a whole series of practices, so you embed fluency, particularly in maths, so that the students are competent in a whole range of different types of applications, and they should grow in confidence that they can undertake any type of assessment where they've got to deploy these applications. And the benefit of the particular that platform is that you can have unique questions for every student. That removes an awful lot of the concerns colleagues will have regarding potential collusion or anything else like that. And it also brings efficiency gains to staff from the perspective that they're not marking a considerable volume of material. So I can see there, in certain circumstances, it could be a highly effective way to assess students, and also to ensure that we reduce some of the staff workload requirements. They can be doing more appropriate interventions with students that need it, rather than marking a whole series of papers.
And I think too, Robert, the ability to have those unique randomizations of questions allows instructors to offer students the ability to take an assignment multiple times.
Yeah.
So, you know, the student can take assignments multiple times. It doesn't increase the marking time on a student because they're automatically graded, but it allows the student to do that additional practice, to learn a little bit more and to work at solving that. The other thing that I've seen is some instructors, what they've done is they've changed the framework of their courses. So instead of, you know, the assignments are worth 10%, the midterm is 30, the final exam is worth 60, what they've done is they've broken it into multiple sort of smaller chunks so that students don't feel this huge pressure towards that final exam. They're now willing to work towards learning some concepts and spending the time to learn those concepts as they go along, which is what we really want to encourage, right? We want to encourage students learning, not just, you know, for that final test and cramming for that final test.
Definitely. We've also got an interesting question in the chat box. With digital learning becoming more prevalent in teaching, are professors worried that this may affect their own job security? Where do professors fit in the digital landscape? I see Robert shaking his head there.
Yeah, well, perhaps Mark would like to contribute, but I just look at it that we still need the teachers, the lecturers, professors, the facilities. It doesn't really matter how you pack it. A professor has reached their status through their knowledge and understanding of the subject, their publications, etc. So they are experts in their field. The students need that expertise. The technical side is something that can be mastered, and they can deliver their knowledge and understanding to perhaps a wider audience or a different way, but they're still the expert. They haven't changed. And so I don't see this as a cost-cutting exercise in any form. And I hope that colleagues, any fears are allayed, because we still need people to do the job, unless we're going to be replaced by artificial intelligence. And I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon. I really don't.
Yeah, I mean, artificial intelligence is something which is often fetishized.
Yeah.
I mean, it is, there's wonderful developments in artificial intelligence, but at the end of the day, that notional professor is your designer, the designer that actually starts the artificial intelligence rolling. And I think it articulates so many things here in terms of that human presence, whether it be a professor or not, that human presence as a designer, as an integrator of the conversations, which are all part of feedback loops or part of the relationship building, which is about retention, etc. I think that's actually key. And I think in STEM subjects, there's an opportunity to look at the Scholarship of Teaching and Learning, which is about application and integration of knowledge about learning and teaching, and research associated with that in STEM, alongside the application and integration of knowledge into our classrooms based upon our own scientific STEM expertise, etc. So I think the role of the teacher, the professor, there is still there and going strong.
I can see a need for deployment in a way to support students who are perhaps struggling with certain aspects, or who may need slightly different interventions than are available online. So I don't see this in any shape or form as being a threat to lecturing staff and at all.
No, and I think, the role of the instructor and the teacher may change a little bit with the adoption of technology, but it doesn't go away, right? The instructor is the one who has the expertise in that subject. And now they can maybe focus on, working with students on problems or working through certain examples. And so there are certain aspects of the role that, digital resources can provide, but the instructor is still needed there to really make sense of it for the student and to help guide the student, like we've been talking about.
Yeah, the instructor is there, the guide on the side, the designer, the advisor, the evaluator, the redesigner. Artificial intelligence is pretty intelligent, but humans are pretty good at that stuff as well. So yeah, long live the teacher, that's what I'd say.
Do you think it could actually maybe attract certain people to teach more, because they can focus more on the information, the subjects they're teaching, than sort of long periods of marking, kind of more sort of that when there are things that digital education can help out with, if they know that that barrier is being lowered, that they might be more keen to teach?
Well, that's a difficult one. I mean, for who's that convenient for? I mean, teaching isn't an act of convenience, it's an act of effectiveness, and we deploy technologies to support the effectiveness and efficiency. I think the wrong starting point is how can we plug technologies in to make people's lives easier? That's a different question, I think.
And I'd also like to consider the fact that one of the big advantages of digital learning is that there's the ability to continue learning kind of outside and beyond the classroom. And I would like to ask, how can asynchronous and digital learning help boost student employability with opportunities for both undergraduates and lifelong learners?
Well, you can package up any particular type of learning, a module or a course or something like that. You can package it up and deliver it all around the world because it's on digital 24/7. So obviously from either a CPD point of view, people can engage with that if they so wish. And I'm a great believer, the greater investment in your own particular development, the better opportunities come in life. So whether it be a postgraduate course or an undergraduate course, the learning opportunities are revolutionized because of digital platforms. There's some challenges, obviously, with STEM subjects, in that they're very practical, and the technology is not quite there yet for, shall we say, virtual labs to give the real experience that you would get in a normal laboratory. Maybe that will come. I'm quite sure there'll be developments occurring, but so far I haven't been bowled over with the quality of some of these virtual laboratories.
I agree. I think as kind of the haptic distance kind of feeling technology and operation of instruments, etc., as that develops, then it will improve. But I think the thing I'd add into this is, it's a rhetorical question, really. Universities, STEM subjects need to have students immersed in appropriate digital technologies, because that's the world they're going to go and work in.
Mm-hmm.
So, designing to appropriately include exposure to those. I mean, there's not many universities in the world I've been in or worked in where there isn't some statement about graduate attributes and digital capability of one form or another. And where there hasn't been, it's certainly there after the pandemic.
Definitely.
I checked. I got a message on LinkedIn earlier last week, and it was one of my graduates from our geography courses, and she's got a job as a digital analyst, and she's using GIS, etc. But it's the stuff the students don't necessarily like that is quite important. And when we develop programs, we're working with industry in order to develop the program to make it effective. Mm-hmm. But it's very reassuring that, we put in place things that employers actually want and need.
Yeah, and I think too, adding in pieces, to meet students where they are, help them learn the different aspects and improve the learning experience overall, so that students, when they do graduate, they have sort of less gaps in their knowledge, that they can then, go to an employer and have a broad understanding of the subject that they've learned. And I think that that's super important, right? And teaching students to be lifelong learners, that the learning experience is the important thing. It's not the grade in the course necessarily, it's the learning and understanding how to learn and how to continue to develop as they move into a job.
Mm-hmm. And Louise, how would you say that the Mobius platform facilitates that?
I think a lot of it is providing opportunities for the student to test themselves, to figure out what is it that they know and don't know, and be able to then refresh themselves on different materials, and offering, the assessments, as we've talked about, different variations so that students can try things over and over again, allowing them to really become masters of what they're studying.
Mm-hmm. Right. And we've got some other interesting questions in the chat box, actually. Sorry, let me just get my chat box up. So one person has asked, creating well-designed learning material is obviously expensive and takes time. STEM subjects, such as computer science, have to be adapted constantly to not get outdated. How do you deal with the problem of the high costs of updating such materials? Might using these materials end up in just teaching the old stuff anyway?
Yeah.
A double-pronged question there.
No, it's a reality check. I mean, if you want high quality, the product that you produce has either got to be just good enough, and there is a history of producing stuff which is new and up to date, but it's just good enough, or there's a history of massive investment producing stuff for sale, which is high quality, almost like Disneyfied. But I do think what it does talk to is a question I think what Robert alluded to before, is about to what degree are universities reorientating their investment patterns into learning designers, content creators, to support just the experiences that our colleague from computer science is talking about, you know, the idea of updating materials, producing materials of high quality, and you know, to what extent are they reusable or redundant, etc. So again, it's all part of the design. Design's got to be can do as well as would like to do as well. So yeah, it's a very important reality check. That bad design and recycling old materials, it's a slippery slope, I think, particularly in the regulatory environment we're in terms of the expectations of contemporary nature of the programs we produce.
And I think one of the important things is to use technology that facilitates updating material. You know, in the past, in having conversations with instructors, they would have created a 50-minute lecture on something. And if you needed to replace something, you had to redo that entire 50-minute lecture. We've learned a couple of things, obviously, over the course of the years. One is that a 50-minute lecture is not the best way for a student to learn. They're not able to sort of take in everything in that video recording. So by, you know, splitting it up into bite-sized chunks then helps with that reusability, because now you can replace certain piece of content very easily with another piece of content to help with the, you know, keeping things current. And as well, using some of these feedback loops that we've talked about for instructors to make sure that their course is really doing what they want to do and providing the learning opportunities that it wants for the students.
Robert, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I think the colleagues have certainly covered a lot of the aspects that are highly pertinent. There will be content that doesn't date, but there's an awful lot that needs to be updated on an annual basis. I update, well, personally, I update my lectures on some of it is highly contemporary. And as Mark has said, that the regulatory environment changes. There is an expectation now of accessibility, etc. For example, when you're doing captions on videos, you've got to make sure the captions are appropriate, and it's not, quite frankly, some of it is gobbledygook. And it's about having the right investment in technology to allow that easy use by staff, so it's not wasting their time and effort. So yeah, we're always going to have to update stuff.
Yeah, definitely. And this is another interesting question. This probably goes more into the kind of the design side, but someone has said, from personal experience, totally, online learning environments are missing considerations for screen fatigue and similar, not only because of the sessions, but also the materials require you to consult a device. How can this be addressed?
By better design. You know, if you're asking somebody to be exposed for so long that they experience massive screen fatigue, unless they've got some sort of underlying challenge or pathology or whatever, I mean, which is a different set of considerations. But you know, if you're asking people to disobey the rules of what we know about psychology and the periods in which we can engage in meaningful ways, then that's just bad design. So fatigue, notwithstanding, you know, really sort of thoughtful stuff about inclusion and fatigue, you know, about people presenting with particular challenges, that's a separate set of design issues. But broadly, the devices currently aren't going to go away, but it may be that in the future our devices are different. Are we going to be wearing them? Is this my sitting back in my chair on my virtual learning environment, engaging without typing and speaking to it, etc.? You know, developments will come, but I think it's about designing out some of these problems where the human physiology is challenged by the devices and environments that we've got. But we're not there yet. I know I look at screens an awful lot of the time, and it reminds me of the days with my head in a microscope most of the day.
Yeah, I think design, you know, like it all goes back to design. It really does. When you're designing an online course, you want to provide different ways that the student can interact with the material. right? You don't want to always use the exact same thing. You want to, maybe there's some time when they're reading, there's some time when they're watching a video, there's some time where they're interacting with a question, there's some times where they're actually having to work out a problem. And that also helps with the screen fatigue, because you're giving them different ways to interact with the material. And that is very important.
Definitely.
Variety, multi-sensory. Yeah, I mean, these are important design considerations. Unimodal delivery is the argument against the didactic lecture, blah, 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 50 minutes, which I like good lectures. They can be very good and then engaging, but 50 minutes listening to a monotone isn't always the best design.
And do you think that STEM courses compared to, for example, humanities courses require more of this sort of multimedia experience because of the nature of, I mean, I personally studied English literature where a lot of my time was spent reading, whereas most of my friends who did science courses were in the lab a lot. So that multimedia aspect is important. Would you agree that it's more important in STEM?
That's difficult because obviously I don't have experience. Okay, I did an arts and humanities degree as an undergraduate, and that was a different experience to working in STEM now. But STEM subjects are very content heavy, particularly in our subject areas with laboratories. Whether they can be simulated or not, that's something we can debate, but it's very practical. And our students at our institution really love the practicals. That's the thing they don't miss. They may skip a lecture or whatever, but they won't miss labs. And so it's that practical experience. And until the technology develops to such an extent that we can give exactly the same experience as being in the physical lab, I think the education that is delivered digitally will be more about the lecture, the actual learning of a technique or something else like that. And that can be done in bite-sized chunks.
I think STEM requires, in good design, the deployment of good digital materials and digital activities to complement what's going on in that face-to-face, kind of environment or workplace or whatever it is. Back to your point, Julia, about studying English literature and having to read a lot. Yeah, that's great. But imagine reading in different ways. Will we see literature in the future being a more capacious concept where we have multimedia representations, where we have an interface between text, voice, video, haptic, multi-sensory interactions, etc. What will the function? We're having this conversation in 50 years. Well, you might be having this conversation in 50 years, but not me. We could be thinking differently, couldn't we? So as close as you're going to get to me, future guys.
This is another actually interesting question that's come up on the chat box, is about a frequent argument against digitizing assessments in STEM, particularly exams in subjects such as maths and physics, is that digital formats do not allow students to show the working out of the problems due to interface limitations. Do panelists have any experience with equation editors being used in exams? Louise, I'd like to see what digital ed do towards this as well.
Yeah, it's definitely an area that still needs some development for sure. That'll be my first comment. I think in tools like Mobius, you have the ability to ask the students a question. You can grade just that final answer. You can provide the question sort of in parts so that the student is answering pieces. You also have the ability to grade that final answer, but give them a working space where you want to either have them type out what their thinking for solving that particular problem, or using an equation editor to type out the solution. That often takes, that'll take more time. So you have to, again, going back to design, you have to think about what are the assessments that you're providing to your students and what is a realistic time frame for them to be able to do those assessments. The other thing that I have seen some instructors do is they actually either have that box where the student has to type out an explanation of where their thinking was and how they approach the problem, or some instructors for some of their smaller courses have actually had an oral session with the student afterwards to talk to them about their exam and what was their thinking, and those two pieces together went together to form the final grade. So there's a lot of different ways you can approach assessment. and to really get an understanding of where the student is and what level their understanding is at.
Sorry, there are creative ways also of presenting sequences of thinking, whether it be a kind of relatively linear development of a calculation or application of multiple formulae, by showing students those and at particular points, almost like imagine metaphorically, point an arrow at a point in the calculation, say what's going on here, and ask students to articulate their interpretation at that point. It could be at critical error points. It could be about at this point, what particular formula would you begin to apply before you move on to the next stage in the calculation. All part of the kind of trying to assess the cognitive level of engagement of students with processes in STEM. So I think creativity is another unexploited word. It goes back to Robert's allusion before. These teachers are important. I agree with you, Robert.
Definitely. Well, I'm afraid that brings us to the end of our session, but I'd like to thank everyone for taking part today, especially our panelists, Robert, Mark and Louise, and remind you all that there'll be an on-demanding recording of the discussion and a summary article published on the Times Higher Education website in due course. I hope that you found today useful, and we hope to be able to engage with you at future Times Higher Education events. So thank you very much, everyone, and goodbye.